All right, so I see a few people strolling on in. So hi everyone. My name is Danae. I work in the Green Center and I handle a lot of the marketing and the communications. And today we're joined with Joe Testani, who is our executive director. And today we're excited to just jump into all things career related and how COVID-19 may be impacting a variety of things, whether it's internships or jobs or even the future of work. So that's where we're at. Hi Joe, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Danae?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We haven't seen each other in a little bit, but I was hoping you wouldn't mind just giving everyone who is starting to log on now a little bit more about your background.
Sure. I've been at the university I just passed my 5-year anniversary at the University of Rochester last week. And I am responsible mainly for being executive director of the Green Center for Career Education, which is the central career education office for all of art, science, engineering, undergraduate and graduate students. But I also work to coordinate career education efforts across all the schools at the University of Rochester. And what that means is that thinking through how we can best prepare students to participate in internships and research and part-time work during their time at the U of R, and how to maximize their time at the U of R, and then also how to prepare for post U of R plans, wherever that might go, postdocs, jobs, graduate schools, so on and so forth. And I think the other component of my responsibility is thinking about how we can better position the university to engage with corporations and organizations and the community to recruit the talent that exists at the university. So that's like the easiest way to summarize some of the responsibilities I have and some of the work that we do in our office.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so for everyone who is tuned in, this is pretty informal. We don't have a presentation or anything like that we're about to show you. So we do ask that if you would like to participate and have some questions that you would like to ask Joe, to please use the Q&A feature, which you can find if you hover over Joe's screen towards the bottom. You'll be able to hit Q&A and submit your questions. And then we'll be able to just go into a really fun and hopefully positive conversation about the outcomes of employment right now. But to kick things off, I thought it would be interesting, Joe, if you could maybe share some of your thoughts right now around the future of work and what you anticipate changing going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. I think first and foremost, the last 6 months have really jolted not only the United States, but I think countries all over the world in terms of how we think about work and how we think about our workforce in a variety of ways. I think first, the pandemic, I think really kind of upended what I think some preconceived notions were about what's necessary for work. So as a very basic example, I think most institutions or organizations thought that you had to be physically present, and that was a critical element of doing your work and having an office space and being able to work there. But I think what's been shown is that there's a lot of people that can do work remotely, and a lot of function that might be really actually better suited to be remotely, which might be a cost savings for organizations. I think we've seen this in higher education, 100%. And so I think that's something that is already starting to show itself. I also think it's also demonstrated the inequities of pay and compensation and how certain workers in certain industry sectors are really susceptible to things like a pandemic and public health issues, not to mention the underlying issue of healthcare and the model that we have in the United States in particular around employer-based healthcare and how that really could impact the health of workers and what that might mean long-term and short-term for them. And so I think there's some really challenging things that have been brought to light, which I think then also influence how we might re-engineer workplaces in the future. And I think a really basic prime example of this was Facebook announcing a few weeks ago that they were going to have most of their workers, if they were working remotely, they were free to move to other states and other parts of the country, and their compensation would be adjusted as well based upon that, with with minimal details on that, released right now. But I think that's a really interesting sort of pivot. I've been to the Facebook corporate headquarters in California, and it's massive, and the footprint they have there and what they do there is pretty impressive. But is that really necessary? And is that a harbinger of things to come in terms of how organizations think about their physical locations in space and their workforces? Which brings me to a second topic and issue, and I think that's been really brought to light because of the pandemic, but also I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about and acknowledge what's been happening around the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the horrific things that have happened over the last few weeks to some of the lives that have been lost for people in different communities around the country. And while it might not appear on the surface to be something related to work and how people live their lives, I think it's actually is, to me, very connected to the issues of equity and access to opportunities and livelihoods, and what that means for our communities and the types of jobs and opportunities that people have access to, and what that might mean to change the dynamic of a city, change the dynamic of a community. Really pushing organizations to think more critically about what it means to have equity and access within their organizations, and what does systemic change actually look like within society and organizations, and what that means for evolving how organizations have done their hiring and recruiting. And I think those two topics are related in terms of working from home, remote work, and diversity and access, because I think there's possibilities, if organizations lean into it, to diversify their workforces in ways that I think they haven't thought of, but also continue to create challenges to systems that might be inherently unequal. So I think both of those topics and those societal sort of issues that have been brought to light over the last 6 months, I think have a real significant impact on what the future of work could look like. And I think it's going to be dependent on organizations, employers, to really rethink their practices wholesale and figuring that out. Now, one of the biggest barriers to that is the government. And I don't mean the government like as a systemic issue or problem, but really kind of how laws are written for remote working out of state, taxation. So there's a variety of things that also need to evolve. And so we might be on the precipice of something really shifting in terms of how work is getting done and where it gets done, both in the United States, but also globally. And I think that's going to be really interesting to observe over the next 6 to 12 months, as we are kind of meandering through some sort of economic recession recovery kind of situation, and where talent will still be at a premium for many organizations and many industry sectors. The last thing I'll say about future of work is really around skill development. And this is a topic that I think we've tried to address directly here at U of R, in helping students think about what skills might be very relevant and applicable in the current landscape of work, but also towards the future. And how do we help students complement their academic experience with skill development or competency development that might be very relevant to what's needed in the future workforce? And that's going to be something interesting. How students acquire those skills, I think, has already been demonstrated to be evolving from anything online skill development, code academies, things like that. That's evolving pretty rapidly. And I think we're seeing a proliferation of different kinds of resources for college students in particular to build out skills that might be really relevant or valuable on the marketplace.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe, for that great reflection. I would have to say that based on everything you were just saying, between the Black Lives Matter movement, and then COVID-19, going to remote work, and then even with the success skills, I really feel like 2020 is so far the year of change, right? Like we're hitting a lot of things like nail on the head right now. And like you were saying, the next few months, even up to another year or so, it'll be very interesting to see how a lot of this plays out, because I truly believe that we're barely on the surface of a lot of change, I think, to come.
Agreed.
So thank you for sharing. And one thing for our attendees, I want to let you know that we do have a whole web page on our website for professional development and success skills that I will share in the chat momentarily. And that's a really great place to check out some of those different ways you can explore skill building, like Joe was mentioning. Okay, Joe. So how do you think COVID-19 will continue to impact internships and even jobs as we move forward into the fall?
This is a really interesting one, Danae. I think this is so dependent on industry sector. And I also think the other big factor on this one is what happens with the economy and if we see a resurgence of the virus over the next few months. So I know that's probably like a crappy answer of like, it depends. But I think the reality is it does. And I think that's probably been uh, what's marked this year as so different than previous kinds of recessions or economic downturns or any other sort of disruptions to what's happened to society, is that there's still no clear path forward as to what it might become. And I think
Sure.
that's been the interesting piece of it. So I foresee that certain industry sectors that are able to pivot to remote work and virtual environments will continue to hire students as they see fit, continue to hire interns. I think they'll, especially if their businesses are doing well or haven't been significantly impacted or negatively impacted by what's happened in the economy. So industry sectors that are having to do with ed tech, industry sectors like anything remote related to remote working, technology, AI, machine learning, all are still really relevant because there's a ton of data out there that needs to be figured out. AI and AR and XR kind of experiences are only going to proliferate and get even more common, because that might be ways that people are engaging within those with different industries or services or products. So I think there might be growth in some of those sectors, or at least an evening of those sectors in terms of their hiring needs. Whereas other sectors, and I think it's been documented pretty extensively, things like tourism in particular, anything that's been direct in-person service like restaurants, the industry, and anything related to that, I think have taken quite a hit and are recovering. And retail is recovering somewhat, but a lot of that's online. And so I think we're going to continue to see that go up and down depending on what happens with reopening efforts and possibly renewed lockdown efforts. We're seeing in Florida, Texas, and Arizona massive spikes in coronavirus cases, not just because there's more testing available, but because there's been, I think, an actual rise in the number of cases that they're seeing. So that's going to really impact sort of long-term and short-term the possible opportunities that might be important. I think the most important thing is, how do students continue to adapt and actually pivot to the places where there is hiring happening. I think that's going to be the number one skill that we'll probably revisit more in this conversation, and we'll probably continue to talk about throughout the next 12 months.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So I do see a couple more new people just jumped on. So I just want to remind you all that if you have any questions for Joe, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, which is down towards the bottom of the screen. All right, now back to regular programming. Okay, Joe. So you had mentioned a little bit about seeing different industry sectors grow based on everything that is going on. And I wanted to just mention that I was reading something the other day about do you know like the breakout rooms that are really popular right now, where you can go in and like try to figure how to get out? So I was reading something that there have been these new similar style businesses pop up, and they're like virtual reality, like playgrounds that I'm hearing that are like starting to get really big over on the West Coast. And that stuck out to me when you were talking about it, because I'd have to imagine that like AI and virtual reality, like these industries eventually I think are just gonna, it's inevitable. I think that they're gonna boom, especially with more and more going online.
Yeah, they were already on the upswing in terms of hiring, recruiting, and growth. Those companies
Mm-hmm.
were like growth stocks. If you're investing anywhere, you're investing in AR, XR, AI, machine learning, because that was already sort of on a trajectory for growth. In terms of economically, but also just in terms of companies. I think what it shows, Danae, is people want to connect with other people. And
Yeah.
so in lieu of being able to do that in person, how can we do that effectively, right? How can we find opportunities to do that? So I think different social sites, I will call them, or social tools about people being able to relate and connect with folks. I think you'll continue to see that. And then obviously if this um, is addressed to some degree in terms of the pandemic and we're able to return to some sort of normalcy of interaction in person, that's great. But some of that might not be able to go back to that. Travel might not be normalized for quite some time. And so I think opportunities to experience other cultures, other people, I think it's going to be a possible growth sector, and it's going to be a lot of companies that are trying to test the waters out and seeing what the activity is to see what might stick.
Okay. We have a couple questions coming in. So if Rochester goes online after Thanksgiving, which career development services will be available and which services will be dropped?
So as of right now, in terms of our planning for the fall, in terms of our office, as well as the other offices throughout the university that deal with career education services to students, pretty much everything that we've offered to students in person will be available virtually or online. So as an example, one-on-one advising, currently available online, will continue throughout the fall and throughout over breaks. As long as our staff is working, those services are available. The online engagements, so anything that would involve alumni, we have a number of initiatives and programs that we'll be rolling out in the fall where alumni will be speakers and talking about industry sectors, sharing their insights, giving advice. Those will be pretty much occurring throughout the fall semester and into the spring semester virtually. So we'll be continuing to engage alumni, and we actually have a pretty significant campaign in the university to involve even more alumni to give back to students in that as one capacity. I think the big thing that we're really experimenting with and working on is how do we continue to have employers recruit students at U of R. So we'll be having a virtual career expo in September where companies will be coming to recruit in a virtual forum that we're developing through our Handshake platform. So that's going to continue, and employer recruitment and interviewing will all happen virtually, and we're prepared to be offering that throughout the fall semester and honestly into the spring semester as well. So all the typical services that we would provide to students in person are actually going to be provided online, and we're looking and experimenting with different ways to do that effectively. So I think as we go through that, we're going to be asking students for feedback on some of the different technology we might be using or different platforms or programs that we might be launching to see if we're hitting the mark and if it's meeting the needs of students, but also the recruiters and alumni that are always very actively involved in giving back to the institution, but also recruiting talent from the university. So I'm happy to say that we've not experienced, I think, a disruption in our service to students, and we remain available. We are paying attention to what's happening around the country and around the world in different industries and who's recruiting and who's not. And we have a team of folks in our office that are actively reaching out to alumni and employers to cultivate new job opportunities, internships, leads, to make sure that there's opportunities that are specifically tailored to U of R students, but also we are part of a larger network of jobs and internships. And our Handshake partner continues to update and highlight employers that are still actively seeking students, and I think that will continue through the fall as well.
Great. So with that being said, do you anticipate that some of us will be on campus in August?
In terms of students or staff and students?
I think staff and students.
I think as of right now, from all the conversations that I've been privy to and part of, the goal is to have students back on campus in the fall. Now, there's a lot of um, different stipulations to that. I think it depends on where students are coming from, and I think the challenges that some students might face in getting back to campus and what that might look like. And I think right now the university is working through the details and the logistics of how to do that in a safe way and how to do that in a really coherent and clear way so that all parties involved, students, their families, faculty, staff, are aware of what those processes are. So I anticipate in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll start to get a little bit more details on how that looks for the fall. I think the offices that serve students will be a mixed sort of variety in terms of who will be on campus and which services will remain virtual. I think that's partially due to safety and health concerns, and not can we um, can we ensure that services are still provided to students, but maybe not inundating the campus with more people. So I think there's going to be some questions about what are staff that are and faculty that are needed on campus in person, but also making sure that we're maintaining and having the health and safety of students at the forefront of that. So, for example, like residence life staff will most likely be on campus and readily available to support students because the residential experience is really important at U of R, and that will be something that's supported and present and in existence. Where other offices maybe that are more operational behind the scenes might be done remotely because they don't require face-to-face interactions with other parts of campus or students specifically. So I think we're going to see a really kind of a blended hybrid of in-person experiences as well as virtual experiences in the fall. And I think we're going to be learning a lot. And I think that's going to be the name of the game in the fall, that we're going to learn a lot, gather a lot of information, and adapt as we go along to make sure that students are getting good experiences, but also recognizing that this is a very unique situation that we're going to be kind of learning how to navigate. So are students able to learn? Are they able to connect with each other? And can we do that in a safe environment? Those are going to be the critical things to consider as we think about fall.
Yeah, definitely really good points, Joe. And like you said, I definitely think we're gonna learn as we go for some of these initiatives that we're gonna try out for some of us, like the first time ever. So it's going to be interesting. I see a question coming in about graduate students based on what you just said. Do you think that the grad students doing coursework, do you see a similar situation for them as well for the fall?
Yeah, pretty much. I think when we think about, when I say students, we're thinking about graduate and undergraduate students. I think graduate students are a little bit of slightly different in the sense of their involvement in different research projects and labs or any research that they're doing across the institution, and the reliance and the important role that they play in some of the work that's being done at the institution on a research level, as well as their really important role they play in teaching undergraduate students, serving as TAs, serving as research assistants. So I know that's a continual focus of many departments around campus of making sure our grad students are protected, but also ensuring that they continue to be part of the fabric of the education and research enterprise for the university. Graduate students are slightly different in the sense that most of them are living in Rochester, most of them are independent adults, so to speak, whereas our undergraduates are in slightly different expectation about being on a residential campus, living on campus, and some of the other services or expectations that come with being a resident of the campus.
Yeah, and I would imagine that anything on campus we would be doing, we'd be practicing social distancing. More likely than not, we'll be probably required to wear a mask.
Yeah, I think everything I've read from, in the Chronicle of Higher Education about what the expectations are for fall at universities and higher ed, based on what's coming out from CDC and some of the other public health entities. Really, masks are going to pretty much be a norm for everything and everywhere on campuses. I think social distancing will still be something that's highly recommended, encouraged. Sanitizing spaces is going to be something that's going to be regularly happening, both expectation on students to self-monitor and sanitize, workspaces, as well as cleaning that's coming in to make sure the spaces that we're using, especially public spaces, are clean and free. So a lot of the things that we've read about as being normative right now in the States, in terms of society, mask, social distancing, washing your hands, those are going to be constants, I think, for a fall semester. And I don't think they'll be much different. And it's going to be very much on students as well as other members of the community to be diligent in practicing some of those things, just because I think that'll be an expectation for helping to keep the curve down and keep the health of all parties in the community really in a good health.
I agree. We definitely want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and that everyone is safe and healthy. Definitely a top priority. So in regards to online learning, do you think that there will also be a hybrid there? Will some students maybe go into the classroom and then some people learn online?
I think those are things that are being discussed currently. I think it's going to have to be some sort of hybrid, just because I don't know if all students will be able to make it back to campus physically. Might be a family situation, a health situation, might be international sort of travel, might be limited from countries that they might be coming from. So I think that's probably a necessity that will be a component that's will be part of it. I think the details of that are being developed and sort of navigated right now among faculty, the deans, and the provost's office to evaluate that. So I think those are probably going to be the cases, but I think we'll see more details of that in the coming weeks.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So I have a two-part question. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So many programs have discontinued paid research, internship, and other domain-specific jobs due to COVID-19. What are some other job alternatives that exist right now that can earn money even while working remotely? And then part two, you had mentioned that some people are looking for student aid even now. And where are those positions listed, or can they be found?
Great questions. And so I think you posted the summer opportunities page and in the chat. So we're partnering with a number of organizations this summer to pilot a number of different resources. So they are virtual internships, virtual projects. Some are compensated, some are unpaid. Virtual competitions that are happening. So all of those we've kind of compiled a listing of different entities that we feel are pretty high quality and really valuable. And so those are ways for students to continue to look for either paid or unpaid ways to build experience. And I think that's a really important thing that we've laid out. We've also identified ways for students to build skills. So it might be taking shorter courses, not maybe academic courses for credit, but things that they're building certain competencies or skills. And we have a fund that students can apply for to receive support to pursue those kinds of experiences. So those are smaller than our summer internship funding that we typically have done in the springtime, but we did fund a number of students to do virtual experiences this summer. And now we're also trying to support students to pursue these kinds of skill or competency building experiences to continue. So I think this summer is really an interesting one in that it's going to be cobbling together a variety of experiences that demonstrate your continual effort to learn. It might be teaching yourself, it might be self-directed, it might be working with organizations. And so I think that's something that if students are trying to figure out what is the right fit for them, I encourage you to sit down with one of our advisors to figure out how do we do that? What's the right fit? What are the interests that you have? Are you trying to change something in a local community from a social good perspective, or trying to get experience in finance and trying to build a skill set to prepare for an internship for next summer? So I think it's going to be varied. It's going to be varied based on the individual interests of students, but there are a variety of things that we've identified already that will help students identify that. And we're also going to be reaching out to alumni in the coming weeks to solicit more opportunities like that, projects that might be paid or unpaid, shorter term internships that might be available for students to participate in. So we have some good things that are out there right now, and we encourage students to explore those. And we hope to identify even more throughout the summer and into the fall semester as well. I think as labs and research enterprises get back up to speed at the university, I think we'll see some of those opportunities coming back in the fall and into the spring, even in virtual. Those might be possible, or it might be in person. That will vary from department to department based on security, safety, and the different needs of those units. So I think we'll see some of that return. Student employment in part will return. It might look a little different than it did in the past. So I think all of these things will be there. They might just look slightly different in the fall in terms of like what they looked like in previous semesters.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And I did, like Joe had mentioned, I just put in 3 different links into the chat that go to 3 different websites, I guess you could say. And you might think they look similar based on the titles, but they are very great resources, and each one has a different spin on different opportunities. Like Joe had said, there's some virtual internships and projects specifically laid out for you, and then there's another site that has some more information about other competitions you can participate in. So I highly recommend you to check out some of those links. Okay, so I was hoping you could touch on, Joe, a little bit more about international opportunities. So we have a question that has given us some more information about an individual who has a friend from Germany who is considering maybe doing an internship in the States sometime early next year. So in your opinion, what do you think the likelihood is of seeing these opportunities being available when we start to think about international internships?
I think anything having to do with international travel, I think is very tentative at best, even into the spring. I think for the fall, most of those things are being suspended. So, for example, all of our international education, education abroad kind of opportunities to travel for our students to travel to other countries to do, study abroad or things like that are suspended as of right now, just because there's too much uncertainty and there's too much risk for people to be traveling between countries. So the spring in some ways seems really far away. In other ways seems like right around the corner. And I don't anticipate us to know that information probably until later this fall, depending on what happens if we see a resurgence. Depends which public health model you look at and what newspapers or TV shows you watch will dictate kind of what the prognostication is on what the future will bring regarding the pandemic. But I think it's very tentative to be able to say for certain if international travel is going to return in mass in the springtime. I just don't think employers will be taking some of those risks. I don't think travel restrictions will probably continue for a time being, and I think it depends also largely on country. And where people are coming to and from, and what the pandemic or what the health status is of those countries. A really basic example is like United States and Canada. We can't cross the border still, and they've extended the border crossing closure until the end of July. So that's something that countries are kind of evolving and sort of regulating on a month-by-month basis to observe and evaluate what's happening. So there is some international travel, but I think to make wholesale determinations about programs and structured opportunities between countries, I think that's going to be a little bit tougher to call at the stage that we're at. If a student's trying to get here from another country and wants to do an internship here, there's possibilities of that, but I think it's hard to say whether or not certain industry sectors will still be in person at that stage. So you might be able to do a virtual internship with a company from outside the United States, which very well might be a possible option to pursue or to look at. I think it's kind of underlies the larger issue of our international sort of culture that we like at the University of Rochester, that we try to foster, and how this is going to really create some challenges over the next 6 to 12 months on our ability to do that in effective ways. At the same time, it might create new opportunities to be creative and still experiencing different cultures, is still getting exposure to different opportunities. So Education Abroad Office here at the university has done some really cool stuff, and they've identified virtual international internships, virtual international experiences that students can participate in. So there's some really great opportunities to still get exposure to international sort of cultures and opportunities, but it might not be in that physical form yet, just because I think there's a lot of uncertainty around what might be possible and what might be safe to do at this time.
Thanks, Joe. So, how would you suggest that students best succeed while doing a virtual internship?
It's a good question. I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me around virtual experiences, internships, projects, and that is when you think you've communicated enough, you probably need to communicate a little bit more. And I think communication is going to be the critical piece of this. Keeping people up to date, getting regular check-ins, really setting up regular conversations and meetings. You know, we take that for granted that when you work in an organization or do an internship, you could pop into somebody's office, or you might lean over to somebody you're sitting next to and ask them some questions. You don't have that opportunity to do that when you're virtual. So you have to create those opportunities in order to communicate regularly and ask questions with your supervisor, with coworkers. So I think that is really critical to think about your constant communication and to structure and schedule some of those communications in order to stay abreast of what's happening and also keep your employer kind of aware of what you're working on. Which leads me to kind of a related topic of building relationships and more the informal way people can connect with each other. I think one of the best things about doing an internship, and I know my experience was when I did internships in graduate school and as an undergrad, was the relationships I was able to form by being in an organization that had nothing to do necessarily with the work, but had to do with just people connecting on shared interests and topics. That's something, once again, that you have to be a little bit more deliberate and proactive about, because the organic nature of doing that goes away, and it doesn't exist when you're not physically able to be someplace. So I think that's an important piece to think about. How do you engineer that? How do you set up times where maybe 15, 20 minutes you can say, I just want to learn more about you and who you are and how you got here and your background, and where you can just talk and have more casual conversation with folks, or maybe it's like a virtual happy hour where you're just getting together and getting to know people and talking and connecting with folks. I think that's really something that's a big loss, but I think it's so valuable in terms of those experiences. So you have to be more on top of how to create that organically, or to ask about those opportunities with the organization that you might be interning with. I think the third thing is to track your work. So some organizations I think are really comfortable and savvy with their ability to manage virtual employees. Others are kind of trying to figure this out still and not necessarily sure how to do this effectively. So keeping track of the work and the progress that you're making on different things that you're working on, projects, whatever it might be, I think is really critical. And to be able to document that and also articulate that to supervisors or people that you're working with, of what you accomplished, the progress that you've made. So not, once again, typically something you might not do if you were in person, but I think in a virtual environment, it probably is helpful to be able to do that and do that effectively. And when in doubt, ask questions. I think the key thing is to not be sitting at home thinking about what someone might expect of you or what a project might look like. Ask as many questions as you can. Some companies have instituted Slack channels or other forms of communication like that, where you can jump into forums or communities to talk. And I think there's ways to use technology to maintain and have some of those conversations. I think it's going to be really critical in a virtual environment.
I agree. So, Joe, what are a few things that have been working for you while you've worked from home?
I think some of those things, right? I think
Yeah.
we created a Slack channel in our office, so a few of us are on and using to be able to communicate more readily and more easily. I think that's been helpful. It's cut down on like email exchanges and things like that. I think more informal conversations and gatherings for people. I think that we've done that within our team. We've made it efforts to do that within our team to find space just to like casually get together, as opposed to being a meeting with some sort of focused agenda or tactical outcome that we're looking for. So I think that that's been really helpful to do that. And I think probably most important or most helpful to me is thinking about my day and making sure there's times when I'm not on Zoom or not on video, because I think that it's been proven to be very exhausting and induce fatigue in a variety of ways. So I think that's something that making sure that, not in a Zoom meeting from 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, like I am today, actually. But I think maybe guarding against that as much as you can, I think is important, just because you need some balance and time, and your wellness is really critical in these times. It may seem not to be a big deal, but I actually think it is a kind of an important thing to be thinking about when you're of your own health and mental health and wellness when thinking about managing virtual environments.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would say that similar to what you were saying, having some sort of routine has been really helpful since we've been remote for I don't even know how many months at this point. But a routine has been great, just even from my perspective. It's been really nice to know that every day this is what I'm going to do Monday through Friday, and have that I'm going to take a walk maybe after lunch for a couple minutes and get some fresh air. But because without that, like the days just kind of blur together, or you move from one virtual project to the next and you're just like, okay, I need some human interaction. I need to remove myself from my space, where you don't have the commute into the office anymore, or just passing by someone when you go fill up your water bottle. So I really do think those are really great tips and a lot of great insights. So thank you.
Has that helped you out?
What, going outside?
Yeah, just some of those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, it definitely has. I definitely feel much more comfortable working remotely, and I found a good rhythm. And I think it speaks a lot to not everything's going to work the same for someone else. And I think you gave a really great variety of options. Like some people will love Slack. Like we know on our team, some people really love it. And then some people are like, no, not another way to communicate. Like, can we just stick to email, please? So I really just think that it's important to explore a little bit and just find something that's going to work for you in the best way possible.
Because it can be hard to get you back in the office when we
It
go back.
might be. It might be. Whereas I know you can't wait to get back.
Well, no, I'm fine. Like,
Okay.
I just want to see people. I think
Yeah.
it's most like just socially like seeing people. So if I have
Yeah.
that, I think I can manage that stuff, but doing both is more complicated.
Yeah, I agree. Like I've loved working from home and like hanging out with my cat all day, but I do miss just seeing people. So once we get to a healthier balance where maybe we can have, I don't know, in-person lunch meetings, then that'll be fun. All right. Well, we are just out of time. So I want to thank everyone who hung out with us for the last hour or so. It's been really great to have you, and the questions were awesome. Joe, do you have any final few words before we head out for the day?
No, I think continue to stay safe, continue to ask questions. Me and my team are available for you guys as if there's questions that come up that are specific for your kind of case. But we'll be doing a number of things over the next few months to bring employers and alumni and share so you can hear some of their thoughts. And so keep an eye out for future programs from the Green Center.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, like Joe said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us, you can reach out to us on social media, you can schedule an appointment with an advisor. Please just don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to speak with you and just check in and make sure everyone is doing all right. All right,
Thanks.
Joe.
Good to be back in the rhythm with you in this.
Yeah. And for those listening, we will be doing a few more AMAs this summer. So stay tuned, and we hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Take care. Be safe, everyone.
Bye, Joe.
Bye, Dan.